Top 1. Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe, the temple before civilization, dates back to 9600 BCE. On a wind-scraped hilltop in what is now southeastern Turkey, there is nothing around you. No village, no city, no farmland, no pottery. The people alive at this time are hunter-gatherers who follow herds to survive. Yet directly in front of you, carved from limestone and raised to the height of a full-grown man, stand two T-shaped pillars, each weighing 20 tons. They are ringed by stone benches and decorated with bas-relief foxes, scorpions, and vultures so precise they look like they were made yesterday. You are standing in the oldest temple on Earth, and no one has any idea how it got here. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating Göbekli Tepe in 1994 after a Kurdish shepherd reported unusual stones jutting from the hillside. The site had actually been cataloged decades earlier by the University of Chicago in the 1960s, but was dismissed as a medieval cemetery. Schmidt spent the next 20 years correcting that mistake until his death in 2014. Radiocarbon dating, conducted by Schmidt and the German Archaeological Institute, places the oldest enclosures at 9600 to 8200 BCE. That makes the site at least 11,600 years old, 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, and 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The T-shaped pillars reach up to 5.5 meters in height. The quarry where they were cut sits between 100 and 500 meters away. Someone crossed that distance repeatedly with stones weighing between 10 and 20 tons, using tools we have not found and methods we cannot reconstruct. The structure they built was not a shelter. There are no hearths for cooking, no trash, middens, and no sleeping quarters anywhere at the site. Klaus Schmidt estimated that constructing a single enclosure would have required coordinating at least 500 workers, an organizational scale that, for a non-agricultural society with no known surplus food storage, is nearly impossible to explain. Then there is Pillar 43, known as the vulture stone. It depicts a headless human figure, a vulture holding a round object on its wing, and three handbag-shaped symbols running along its top register. Researcher Andrew Collins described this panel as a possible astronomical record. In 2017, a study by Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsakritsis, published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, proposed that the vulture stone encodes the date of a catastrophic cosmic impact event around 10,150 BCE using recognizable constellation positions. Whether or not that specific claim holds, the panel is clearly doing something beyond decoration. Around 8000 BCE, the entire complex was deliberately buried under thousands of tons of rubble, not abandoned or destroyed, but carefully and intentionally entombed. The mainstream archaeological view holds that Göbekli Tepe forces a revision of the sequence of human development, not the timeline. Scholars like Stanford archaeologist Ian Hodder argue that mobile hunter-gatherers were capable of greater social coordination than previously assumed, particularly when motivated by a shared ritual purpose. The deliberate burial, in this reading, follows a known Neolithic practice of decommissioning sacred spaces, covering what is finished so it cannot be profaned. But the organizational problem doesn't shrink when you revise the sequence. It grows. Feeding, coordinating, and directing 500 or more workers without agriculture means someone was storing food at a scale we haven't found evidence for, or mobilizing labor across hundreds of kilometers on the basis of a belief system sophisticated enough to commission a cathedral. If the ritual preceded the civilization, what exactly was the ritual for? Some researchers ask whether Göbekli Tepe is not simply an early temple, but the founding site of a belief system, possibly the world's first organized religion, that then produced agriculture as a downstream consequence of needing to feed the people who came to worship here. Philosopher and archaeologist Jacques Cauvin, writing before the full dating was confirmed, suggested that symbolic and religious revolution preceded the agricultural one. Could it be that the temple didn't follow civilization? Could it be that the temple was the seed from which civilization grew? We may never know. Only 5% of the site has been excavated. Whatever answers exist are still underground. Top 2, the Pyramid of the Sun, Teotihuacan. From the hilltops of Turkey, we cross the Atlantic to a jungle in Central America, where a civilization built something just as impossible, aligned it to the same sky, and left behind a mystery that conventional archaeology has never fully answered. The Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan is the city no one built. Picture a city housing 125,000 people, one of the largest urban centers on Earth at its peak, built according to a precise mathematical and astronomical blueprint aligned to the cardinal directions with near-perfect accuracy. Its central pyramid has a base perimeter that, when divided by twice its height, yields the mathematical constant pi to 4 decimal places. Now imagine that when later civilizations arrived and asked who built it, no one could answer. Not even the people living there knew. The Aztecs, who settled in the Valley of Mexico centuries after the city's collapse, named it themselves. Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods. They assumed its builders must have been divine because no human civilization they knew of could have produced it. Systematic archaeological excavation began with Mexican archaeologist Leopoldo Batres in 1905. A 2003 survey by geophysicist René Malone estimated the peak population between 100,000 and 200,000 people. The founders' identity, language, and ethnic origin remain genuinely contested to this day. The Pyramid of the Sun is the third largest pyramid on Earth by volume. Its base measures 225 meters on one side, within a single meter of the Great Pyramid of Giza in dimension. Its orientation is aligned 15 degrees north of west, marking the precise point on the horizon where the Pleiades set in 150 CE. Archaeoastronomer Anthony Aveni of Colgate University confirmed that this same 15.5-degree offset is encoded throughout the city's entire street grid, which covers 36 square kilometers and replicates its proportions at multiple scales. This is evidence of a master plan applied to the whole urban layout from the beginning, not a city that grew organically. Beneath the Pyramid of the Sun runs a natural lava tube cave extending 100 meters into the rock, rediscovered by Jorge R. Acosta in 1971. The cave had been deliberately modified. Ritual deposits, carved chambers, and mirrors were found inside it. The pyramid was built directly on top of it, centered over it, with the cave functioning as a sacred axis connecting the surface world to whatever lay beneath. In 2015, UNAM archaeologist Sergio Gomez discovered something stranger still beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Large quantities of liquid mercury deposited in circumstances suggesting deliberate ritual placement. Mercury does not occur naturally in this region. Someone transported it here from somewhere far away and poured it into the ground beneath the temple. The city was abandoned around 550 CE and partially burned. No conquest explains the collapse, no documented drought of sufficient scale, and no external enemy. The evidence points toward deliberate, organized destruction from within, selective burning of palace structures as though someone wanted to erase a specific class of people while leaving the monument standing. Mainstream archaeology identifies Teotihuacan as a multi-ethnic commercial metropolis that rose over several centuries, drawing migrants from across Mesoamerica. The astronomical alignments are understood as intentional but achievable through careful naked-eye observation built up across generations. Consistent with other Mesoamerican traditions, the internal burning is attributed to political revolt targeted at an elite whose power had become unsustainable. But liquid mercury transported across hundreds of kilometers to be ritually deposited underground, combined with a founding population whose identity has completely dissolved from collective memory and a pyramid built over a pre-existing sacred cave aligned to a specific star cluster. These are not simply organizational achievements. They suggest a depth of esoteric knowledge and long-range symbolic intention that looks less like an emerging civilization building upward and more like the final expression of one that had already reached somewhere. Some researchers ask whether Teotihuacan was designed as a cosmological diagram, a city built to replicate the structure of the heavens on Earth. If the cave beneath the pyramid represented the underworld, the pyramid itself the middle world, and the open sky above the upper world, then the entire city may have been a three-dimensional ritual instrument built to precise astronomical specifications. Who designed that instrument? And is it a coincidence that its base dimensions echo Giza's within a single meter? Top 3. Daring Kuyu. From a pyramid built over a sacred underground axis, We descend literally into the most extraordinary subterranean complex ever discovered, carved into solid rock by hands we cannot yet identify. Derinkuyu is the city that swallowed itself. In 1963, a man in central Turkey knocked down a wall in his basement during renovations and found a room he didn't recognize. Then another room, then a tunnel. By the time archaeologists arrived and began to understand what they were looking at, they had found not a basement extension, but a city. It was a fully engineered underground metropolis carved 85 meters straight down into the volcanic rock of Cappadocia, capable of housing 20,000 people, along with their livestock, food stores, schools, wineries, churches, and their dead. Turkish authorities began systematic excavation following the discovery. The complex was opened to tourists in 1969, though only a fraction of its full depth is accessible to visitors. As of current surveys, the city extends through 18 confirmed levels. At least 600 exterior doors connected the underground network to the surface through concealed shafts. The dating of the original construction remains disputed. Some levels show techniques consistent with the Phrygian period around 800 BCE, but the deepest sections have yet to be reliably dated, and the question of who first conceived the whole system has never been answered. The ventilation problem alone should have made the city impossible. Maintaining breathable air for 20,000 people 85 meters underground without mechanical assistance requires understanding airflow, pressure differentials, and shaft geometry across a structure 18 stories deep before any of it is built. The ventilation system at Derinkuyu consists of more than 15,000 individual air shafts connecting every level to the surface, the deepest reaching 55 meters. Modern engineers who studied the system in the 1970s confirmed that shaft placement was calculated to create airflow through convection. This means whoever designed this system understood fluid dynamics well enough to implement it in rock invisibly in 3 dimensions before the first stone was removed. The defensive architecture is equally sophisticated. Circular stone doors, some weighing up to 500 kilograms, were positioned to seal individual corridors from the inside. Each door was engineered with a central hole, allowing a defender to insert a spear outward while the passage remained sealed, a detail that required both strategic imagination and precise stone cutting. A stable water supply fed by underground springs was incorporated into the lowest levels. Missionary schools with barrel-vaulted ceilings and large communal gathering spaces were carved into the middle levels. This was not a shelter, it was a society. At the 55-meter level, a connecting tunnel links Derinkuyu to a second underground city at Kaymakli, 9 kilometers away. The tunnel is large enough to walk upright through. Derinkuyu is not unique. At least 36 similar underground cities have been identified in the Cappadocia region, suggesting not an isolated local project, but a coordinated regional infrastructure built to a shared design across an enormous area. The mainstream explanation points to the volcanic tuff of Cappadocia, ignimbrite, a soft rock unusually easy to carve, and to the succession of invasions the region endured across centuries. Assyrian, Persian, Arab, and Byzantine threats all created genuine reasons for underground refuge. Mainstream archaeologists propose that successive populations of Phrygians, early Christians, and Byzantine communities expanded an existing network of natural caves over many generations, each phase adding depth and complexity as new threats required deeper shelter. But carving a ventilation network for 20,000 people across 18 levels is not a project you expand by accident over centuries. It requires a unified engineering plan conceived before excavation begins, because the airflow mathematics only work if the full depth of the shaft system is calculated in advance. The question of who first had that plan, who looked at a hillside in Cappadocia and decided to build a city inside it all the way down, has never been adequately answered. Some researchers ask whether Derinkuyu was built not to hide from known enemies, but to survive something that made the surface of the earth temporarily uninhabitable. Something on a scale that required 20,000 people to disappear underground for extended periods with sealed doors, independent water, and internal food production. The engineering is not the architecture of refugees, it is the architecture of civilization continuity. What scenario required that level of preparation? We may never know. The deepest levels haven't been excavated. Whatever the original purpose was, it was buried along with the builders. Top 4. Nabta Playa. From underground cities in the heart of Turkey, we cross the Mediterranean to the edge of the Sahara, where the oldest astronomical observatory in the world was found in the middle of a desert, built by a people history has nearly forgotten entirely. Nabta Playa is the calendar before the calendar. The Sahara was not always a desert. 6,000 years before the birth of Christ, the region now known as the Nubian Desert was a seasonal lake ringed by grassland, inhabited by cattle-herding communities who watched the sky with a precision that would not be equaled in Europe for another 4,000 years. They left behind a stone circle older than Stonehenge and older than the pyramids that track the summer solstice, aligned to specific stars, and encoded an astronomical calendar so accurate it appears to account for a phenomenon that Western science wouldn't formally describe until the modern era. These were, by every conventional measure, nomadic cattle herders in what is now the middle of nothing. The site was discovered by accident in 1973 when anthropologist Fred Wendorf of Southern Methodist University was conducting a survey of the region, and his vehicle became stuck near an unusual arrangement of stones. Excavations over the following decades, detailed in a landmark 2001 paper in Nature by Wendorf and astrophysicist J. McKim Malville of the University of Colorado, revealed a complex of standing stones, burial mounds, and a stone circle arranged with demonstrable astronomical precision. Radiocarbon analysis of associated organic material dated the site to between 6,000 and 4,500 BCE. Malville confirmed in a 1998 Nature paper that two pairs of upright slabs within the circle aligned to the summer solstice sunrise, functioning as a precise solar calendar. That alone would be remarkable, but a 2007 analysis by astrophysicist Thomas Brophy went further. Brophy proposed that 6 inner circle stones correspond to the belt and shoulder stars of Orion as they appeared on the horizon around 4,500 BCE, with the stones spacing proportional to the actual distances between those stars. Then Brophy's analysis produced something harder to dismiss. He proposed that the northern alignments of the same stones encode the meridian transit positions of those stars at a date approximately 16,500 BCE, a date corresponding to a known period of African humid climate, when the region would have been continuously habitable and available for extended sky observation across many generations. Beneath several of the large megalithic slabs, excavations revealed sandstone sculptures shaped, placed, and deliberately buried with no functional explanation. The cattle burials found at the site are among the earliest evidence of a cattle cult anywhere in Africa, a tradition that later becomes central to Egyptian religion. Around 3,500 BCE, the site was abandoned, precisely coinciding with the desiccation of the Sahara as monsoon patterns shifted northward. The people who built it moved northeast toward the Nile. Mainstream archaeology accepts Nabta Playa as a genuine archaeoastronomical site and acknowledges its role in demonstrating that the intellectual foundations of Egyptian civilization had deep roots in sub-Saharan African pastoral culture. The solar solstice alignments are well documented and widely accepted. The stellar alignments are more contested but taken seriously by many researchers. The site is understood as evidence of cultural and astronomical continuity flowing into the Nile Valley civilizations that followed. But the specific claim that the stones encode stellar precession, a phenomenon that unfolds over thousands of years and requires either multi-generational record-keeping of extraordinary precision or mathematical modeling to predict, goes well beyond what we conventionally expect from pastoral nomads with no known writing system. If these people carried an astronomical tradition northeast into Egypt when the desert closed behind them, then the precision of the Giza alignments built 2,000 years later begins to look less like a sudden flowering of genius and more like the continuation of a very old science. Some researchers ask whether Nabta Playa is not the beginning of Egyptian astronomy, but the surviving remnant of something far older, a tradition that was already ancient when these particular stones were set. If the inner circle encodes stellar positions from 16,500 BCE, as Brophy proposes, the knowledge embedded in these stones predates the construction of the circle itself by 12,000 years. Could this be a record of observations made elsewhere by someone else, copied here in stone so it wouldn't be lost? We may never know who first looked up and started counting. Top 5. The Yonaguni Monument. A desert calendar is nothing compared to what was discovered off the coast of Japan in 1986. A structure so large, so geometric, and so far underwater that it has divided the scientific community ever since. The Yonaguni Monument is the pyramid under the Pacific. In 1986, a Japanese diver named Kihachiro Arataki was searching for hammerhead sharks off the southwestern tip of Yonaguni Island when his flashlight hit something wrong. Flat-top terraces, right-angle corners, parallel walls, and a staircase. 25 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, carved from a single continuous mass of sandstone, sat a structure roughly the size of the Titanic, and it looked unmistakably like something built. Arataki reported the structure to local authorities. The first systematic investigation was conducted by Masaki Kimura, a professor of marine geology at the University of the Ryukyus, beginning in 1997. Kimura spent more than 15 years diving the monument and published papers arguing for artificial construction. Robert Schoch of Boston University reached the site in the same year through independent channels and reached a different conclusion, arguing the structure is primarily natural in origin. Between those two positions, the debate has never fully closed. The monument measures approximately 150 meters long, 40 meters wide, and 27 meters tall. In his 2007 analysis, Kimura identified at least 10 distinct architectural features: terraces, a wide road, an arch, 2 towers, what he described as a castle, 5 temple-like structures, and a star-shaped platform. He also identified what he interpreted as tool marks on the stone surfaces and pointed to smaller carved objects found near the main structure, a humanoid head and an animal figure, as evidence of human modification. Schoch, while skeptical of fully artificial construction, acknowledged in a 2000 paper that some features appeared to show evidence of human modification of a naturally formed base, a position he described as a cultural site built upon natural rock. Teruaki Ishii, a government geologist from Tokyo University who examined the site, stated publicly that the overall arrangement of the stones was too regular to be natural. Here is the dating problem. Sea level data from Quaternary Science Reviews confirms that the Yonaguni Shelf was last above sea level between 10,000 and 12,000 BCE. If the structure is artificial, if anyone shaped it, modified it, or built upon it, that work was done before the ocean rose and swallowed it. That places the builders at a minimum of 12,000 years ago, predating every named civilization on Earth by thousands of years. The mainstream geological position, most thoroughly represented by Schoch, holds that Yonaguni is a natural sandstone formation shaped by the predictable fracturing properties of the rock combined with ocean current erosion over millennia. Sandstone fractures along horizontal and vertical planes due to its crystalline structure, which can produce the appearance of right angles and flat surfaces without any human intervention. The few features that appear modified may represent minor later human use of a pre-existing formation, but natural fracturing along perpendicular planes does not produce staircases. It produces rectangular blocks. It does not produce a wide, flat road running parallel to a terrace for an extended distance. It does not produce a triangular depression of consistent depth at the base of a flat-top platform. And it does not produce the spatial arrangement of 10 distinct features in a configuration that, if encountered on land, would not generate a single moment of debate. Some researchers ask whether the Yonaguni Monument is the most dramatic physical evidence yet recovered for a pre-glacial maritime civilization in the Pacific, one that built on land subsequently drowned by the 120-meter sea level rise that followed the end of the last ice age. Researchers including Graham Hancock have cataloged dozens of submerged megalithic structures around the world, all dating to the same post-glacial flooding window. Could the ocean floor be preserving more of our history than everything we have excavated on land combined? No full peer-reviewed excavation of the site has been funded in the 35 years since its discovery. The question remains formally open, sitting on the bottom of the Pacific, waiting. Top 6. Stonehenge's Bluestones. From the ocean floor off Japan, we surface and travel west across the entire Eurasian continent to the plains of southern England, where a structure everyone thinks they understand turns out on examination to be full of questions that have never been answered. Stonehenge's blue stones present the 200-mile problem. You know Stonehenge. The silhouette is one of the most recognizable in the world. But here's what the photographs don't tell you. The large sarsen stones, the ones that form the outer ring, came from Marlborough Downs, 25 miles away. Difficult, certainly, but tractable with enough labor and ingenuity. The blue stones are the problem. 82 of them, weighing up to 4 tons each, were quarried from the Preseli Hills in southwestern Wales, 200 miles away across 2 mountain ranges, the Bristol Channel and the Severn Estuary. Someone looked at those specific stones in that specific Welsh mountain range, decided they were the only stones on Earth that would serve, and moved them 200 miles to a plain in Wiltshire. The question that archaeology has never fully answered is why those stones and why from there. The bluestone connection to the Preseli Hills was established by geologist H. Thomas in a 1923 paper in the Antiquaries Journal, who matched the stone composition, spotted dolerite, to specific outcrops at Carngodog in the Preseli Range. A 2019 excavation led by Mike Parker Pearson of University College London, published in Antiquity, pinpointed the precise quarry sites and found antler picks at Carngodog consistent with organized, deliberate extraction, not opportunistic collection of surface stones. Parker Pearson's team also found something unexpected. The blue stones appear to have been erected first at a site in Wales before being deliberately dismantled and moved. The site, called Wan Mon, is a dismantled stone circle whose dimensions match Stonehenge's bluestone configuration. These stones were not moved once, they were moved twice. A 2020 study in the Journal of Archaeological Science by Richard Bevins and Rob Ixer used isotope analysis to confirm that at least 50% of the bluestones came from the precise outcrop at Carngodog, a finding that eliminates glacial transport as an explanation for the majority of the stones. Those stones were quarried, carried, erected, dismantled, and carried again. Analysis of the stone arrangement within Stonehenge itself shows that the blue stones were repositioned multiple times over a period of approximately 500 years, suggesting they retained active ritual significance across many generations. The mainstream view, most thoroughly developed through Parker Pearson's research, holds that the bluestones were moved by Neolithic people using combinations of sledges, wooden rollers, ropes, and possibly coastal rafting along the Welsh and English shorelines. The motivation, in Parker Pearson's interpretation, was the sanctity of the stone's place of origin. They carried the spiritual power of the Welsh mountains, and moving them to Salisbury Plain was a deliberate act of cultural and religious unification between communities separated by geography. But the ritual motivation, however plausible it sounds, does not resolve the engineering problem. It deepens it. If these stones were sacred specifically because of where they came from, then the builders understood they were attempting a logistical near impossibility and chose to do it anyway, multiple times over 5 centuries. Experimental transport of bluestone weight stones along the proposed coastal route has never been successfully completed, particularly the Bristol Channel crossing. The how remains only partially answered. Some researchers ask whether the Preseli dolerite was selected not for its geographic origin, but for its acoustic properties. The spotted dolerite rings like a bell when struck, a quality measurably different from the sarsen stones that form the outer ring. Archaeoacoustic researcher Rupert Till of the University of Huddersfield demonstrated in 2011 that Stonehenge's layout creates specific acoustic effects, including standing waves and particular reverberation patterns that may have been intentional design features rather than incidental results. Could the monument have been built partly as a sound instrument? Were the bluestones chosen for how they sing? The stones have been standing for 4,000 years, and they are not yet finished with their questions. Top 7. Sacsai Huaman. From stones moved for reasons we can't fully explain, we travel to a structure built from stones that, by any reasonable calculation, should not have moved at all. Sacsai Huaman is the fortress that shouldn't stand. At an altitude of 3,701 meters above sea level, where the air is thin enough to stop a construction worker mid-step, someone moved stones the size of houses, not smooth, manageable blocks, but irregular polygonal masses 8 meters tall and 5 meters wide, weighing up to 200 tons. They were cut into shapes with anywhere from 12 to 44 distinct faces, then fitted against one another so precisely that the joint between them is a continuous, unbroken line. No mortar holds them, no settling has opened them. 5 centuries after the Spanish arrived and built a colonial city directly below using those same stones as a quarry, the walls of Sacsayhuaman remain standing. The Spanish city below has been rebuilt multiple times after earthquakes. The ancient walls above it have not moved. Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon documented the site in 1553, recording Inca oral history that attributed the oldest sections to a pre-Inca civilization. Jean-Pierre Pratzen of UC Berkeley conducted systematic experimental archaeology at the associated quarry site at Rumicolca in the 1980s and 1990s, publishing his findings in the Journal of the Society of Architectural Historians. A 1987 UNESCO World Heritage Assessment identified the fortress as one of the most technically sophisticated dry stone constructions in the world. The site covers approximately 3 hectares of hillside above Cusco and incorporates 3 distinct construction phases, the oldest of which uses the largest and most precisely fitted stones. The largest single stone at Sacsayhuaman, known as the Tired Stone, weighs an estimated 200 tons and stands approximately 8.5 meters tall, confirmed by multiple independent structural surveys. The nearest quarry is 35 kilometers away, along a route that includes a river crossing and a 600-meter altitude gain. Pre-Columbian Peru had no wheeled vehicles, no iron tools, and no draft animals capable of moving multi-ton loads. Experimental transport trials organized by engineer Pavel Pavel in the 1990s moved a 10-ton stone block using 100 workers, wooden sledges, and rope. Scaling that to 200 tons would theoretically require 2,000 workers and a prepared road surface that has never been found along the transport route. Pratzen's quarry experiments documented hammer dressing techniques using harder stones, confirming that precision shaping was achievable with available tools given sufficient time. But Pratzen himself concluded that the polygonal fitting technique at the main fortress walls, those 44-face stones joined to sub-millimeter tolerances confirmed by engineer David Hatcher, Childress's feeler gauge measurements in a 1994 survey remained unexplained by any toolset available to the Inca. Multiple Spanish chroniclers, including Garcilaso de la Vega, writing in 1609, independently recorded that the Inca did not claim to have built the oldest sections, attributing them instead to a people associated with the creator deity, Viracocha. The mainstream view holds that Sacsayhuaman was built through the Mita system, the Inca state's obligatory labor draft, which could mobilize tens of thousands of workers for monumental projects. Pratzen's experiments demonstrate that iterative hammer dressing, while slow, can achieve extremely precise fits through repeated trial and redressing. Transport via timber, sledges on wetted clay surfaces is theoretically feasible with sufficient workforce coordination, even for the heaviest stones. But Pratzen acknowledged the limits of his own experimental results when confronted with the main walls, and the Inca oral tradition preserved in multiple independent Spanish accounts specifically distinguished between structures the Inca built and older structures they found and incorporated. If the people who lived there said they didn't build the oldest walls, the question of who did remains genuinely open. Some researchers ask whether the oldest sections of Sacsayhuaman and the identical polygonal fitting technique found in Egypt's Valley Temple, separated by an ocean and more than 1,000 years, represent the surviving remnants of a single earlier tradition of megalithic construction that predated both cultures. The technique is so specific, so technically demanding, and so unnecessary from a purely structural standpoint that its independent invention in 2 separate locations on opposite sides of the world strains the concept of coincidence. What if it was not invented twice? Top 8. Easter Island's HU platforms. From the mountaintop walls of Peru, we cross the Pacific to the most isolated chain of islands on Earth, where a civilization with no metal tools and no wheeled transport carved and moved 900 statues, and then, in a remarkably short span of time, destroyed every single one. Easter Island's Ahu platforms are the road to nowhere and back. Easter Island is the most isolated inhabited place on Earth. The nearest land, Pitcairn Island, sits 2,075 kilometers away, home to fewer than 50 people. The nearest continent is 3,500 kilometers distant across the open Pacific Ocean. On this speck of volcanic rock, a population never exceeding 15,000 people quarried 900 massive stone statues from a single volcanic crater, transported them across the island along roads still visible in aerial photographs today, and erected them on precisely engineered stone platforms. Then, in a period that appears strikingly short in the archaeological record, they knocked every single one down. Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen made first European contact on Easter Sunday, 1722, and found the statues already toppled. Joanne van Tilburg of UCLA's Easter Island Statue Project has cataloged all 887 confirmed statues since 1990, with findings published in her 1994 book, Easter Island: Archaeology, Ecology, and Culture. Of those statues, 397 remain in or near the Rano Raraku quarry in various stages of completion, providing a unique record of the construction sequence from first cut to final form. In 2019, an excavation by Van Tilburg's team confirmed something that photographs had never revealed. The statues have bodies extending 6 to 8 meters below ground, and those buried portions are covered in carved petroglyphs, messages inscribed on the parts that were never meant to be seen once the statues were standing. The average statue weighs 14 tons. Paro, the largest successfully erected example, stands 10 meters above its platform and weighs 82 tons. The largest statue ever quarried, never finished, and never moved is 21 meters long and weighs an estimated 270 tons. For decades, the transport method was the central mystery of the island. In 2012, archaeologists Carl Lipo and Terry Hunt published experimental results in the Journal of Archaeological Science, demonstrating that statues could be walked upright using 3 coordinated teams of rope pullers in a rocking motion, completing a 10-ton statue transport in under an hour, and matching the rocking wear patterns found at the bases of many statues in transit. The Ahu platforms themselves required substantial earth-moving and precise cardinal alignment engineering work that at some sites involved shifting fill material comparable in volume to the construction of a small pyramid. And the stonework at certain platforms, particularly the walls at Vinapu, uses precisely fitted polygonal construction nearly identical to Inca techniques found in Peru, including the same angled interfaces that create a self-locking joint. This resemblance was noted by Thor Heyerdahl during his 1955 expedition and dismissed for decades. In 2020, a study published in Current Biology by Alexander Ioannidis and colleagues found clear genetic evidence of pre-European contact between Easter Island Polynesians and South American populations, dated to approximately 1150 to 1230 CE. This was a connection Heyerdahl had proposed in 1952 and been dismissed for. It was confirmed 70 years later by DNA. The Ahu at Vinapu, with its Inca-style stonework, is no longer a coincidence requiring explanation. It is evidence of exactly the contact the genetics confirm. The mainstream view holds that Easter Island's population built the statues during a period of ecological stability, then collapsed demographically through deforestation and the introduction of rats that destroyed the island's seed stock, followed by inter-clan warfare that culminated in the systematic toppling of all standing monuments. The Vinapu stonework, in this reading, represents convergent engineering solutions, but the 20-to-1 DNA confirmation changes the weight of that convergence argument considerably. Contact was real. Exchange was real. What else traveled with the Polynesian navigators who reached South America and returned? The petroglyphs buried beneath the statue bases, messages carved on surfaces that were invisible once the statues were erected, suggest the island's inhabitants were encoding information for an audience they didn't expect to be their own descendants. For whom were those messages left? Top 9. The Great Zimbabwe Walls. From an island whose people buried their most important writing, where no living eye could reach it, we travel to West Africa to the largest ancient stone structure in sub-Saharan Africa, built by an empire that history has treated as if it barely existed. The Great Zimbabwe Walls are Africa's erased empire. When European explorers first reached the stone enclosures of Great Zimbabwe in the 1870s, the structures were so large and so sophisticated that a remarkable number of them committed in print to the position that Africans could not have built them. One suggested the site was the biblical city of Ophir. Another attributed it to Phoenician traders. A German explorer proposed it was the lost palace of the Queen of Sheba. It took nearly a century of systematic archaeological work to establish what should have been obvious from the beginning. The largest stone structure in sub-Saharan Africa was built by Shona-speaking African people without mortar, without metal tools, and without any tradition of monumental construction visible in the regional archaeological record before or after. The question is no longer who built it. The question is where the knowledge came from and where it went. European explorer Adam Renders first visited the site in 1867. Systematic excavation began with Gertrude Caton Thompson of Cambridge University in 1929. Her findings established conclusively that Great Zimbabwe was built by indigenous African people of Bantu-speaking ancestry, a conclusion the Rhodesian colonial government initially resisted. Caton Thompson's 1931 report to the British Association for the Advancement of Science is considered the foundational document of Zimbabwean archaeology. The site received UNESCO World Heritage designation in 1986. The great enclosure walls reach a confirmed height of 11 meters, a thickness of 5 meters at the base, and a total length of 250 meters, requiring an estimated 15,000 tons of dry stack granite confirmed by UNESCO structural surveys. The construction uses a refined coursing technique in which blocks are graded by size from base to top, creating an inward-leaning batter that distributes weight and resists lateral pressure, a technique that requires engineering knowledge, not merely accumulated labor. Caton Thompson's excavations recovered artifacts confirming Great Zimbabwe's place in long-distance commerce. Chinese Celadon pottery, Persian faience, and glass beads from the Indian Ocean Trade Network. At its peak, the city housed an estimated 18,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the 14th century world. Gold artifacts found in the ruins included the famous Zimbabwe birds, 8 soapstone carvings of the battler eagle that are now the national symbols of Zimbabwe and Zambia. Within the great enclosure stands a conical tower, 9 meters tall and 5.5 meters in diameter at its base. It is completely solid, not a storage structure, not a defensive feature, and not a functional object of any kind that analysis has yet identified. It simply stands there, purpose unknown, inside the most important enclosure of a civilization that traded across the Indian Ocean. The mainstream view holds that Great Zimbabwe was the capital of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, a Shona state controlling the gold trade between the southern African interior and the Swahili coast ports feeding the Indian Ocean network. The drystone construction technique developed over generations as Shona builders refined their craft at smaller sites before applying it at full scale at the capital. The abandonment around 1450 CE is attributed to resource depletion, overgrazing, deforestation, and regional drought making the site unsustainable. But the batter construction technique, the precise coursing and structural weight distribution, do not appear at the smaller Zimbabwes that supposedly represent the developmental sequence. It appears at the capital, essentially fully formed. The near-complete absence of this 14th century trading empire from standard world history curricula, despite its being the largest ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa and the administrative center of a state conducting commerce with China and Persia, is not an archaeological problem, it is an editorial one. Some researchers ask whether the erasure of Great Zimbabwe from mainstream historical consciousness represents one of the most consequential omissions in modern education, the systematic exclusion of African civilizational achievement from the story of human progress. This is a residue of the colonial-era denial that Caton Thompson refuted in 1929, but that persists in popular perception. An empire trading with China and Persia in the 14th century, governing 18,000 people from a mortar-free stone capital built with structural engineering we still can't fully explain, remains invisible in most curricula. If that can be overlooked, what else have we been taught not to see? Top 10. The Great Pyramid of Giza. From the stone towers of Zimbabwe, we travel northeast across the Indian Ocean and up through the Mesopotamian plain to the single structure whose engineering remains the most debated question in all of archaeology. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the number nobody can explain. Here is a number, 1,440. That is the number of years from approximately 2560 BCE to 1311 CE, during which no structure built by human hands surpassed the height of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It held that record for more than 14 centuries until the Lincoln Cathedral spire was completed in England. The height alone is extraordinary, but the height isn't the mystery. The mystery is what is encoded in the shape itself, a relationship between dimensions that Western mathematics would not formally identify until the 18th century CE, built into stone with a precision that cannot be accidental and that no one in 4,000 years of looking directly at it has fully explained. The first precise survey was conducted by Egyptologist Flinders Petrie between 1880 and 1882, published in The Pyramids and Temples of Gizeh in 1883. That survey remains the foundational measurement reference for everything that followed. Petrie measured the four base sides and found their average length to be 230.3 meters, with a maximum deviation between sides of 4.4 centimeters across a base covering 5.3 hectares. The base is level across that entire area to within 2.1 centimeters, and the alignment to true north, confirmed by Petrie and by subsequent GPS surveys, achieves an accuracy of 3/60ths of a degree. This is a precision not matched by any other ancient structure and not meaningfully exceeded by the Paris Observatory, which was built in 1671 with the explicit purpose of achieving meridian accuracy. The casing stones, 144,000 polished Tura limestone blocks that originally covered the exterior, were fitted with joints of 0.5 millimeter. Petrie described the quality of the work as the finest optician's work scaled up to acres. The internal Grand Gallery runs 47 meters in length at a height of 8.7 meters. Its walls built with 7 interlocking corbelled layers that distribute the enormous weight of the structure above the king's chamber without a single support column. This structural system, the distribution of compressive force through corbelling, was not formally codified in Western engineering until the 19th century. Now for the number. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to twice its height yields the mathematical constant pi to 4 decimal places. 3.159. Mathematician Livio Catullo Stecchini calculated the probability of this arising by chance from arbitrary dimension choices at less than 1 in 10,000. The ratio of the pyramid's height to half its base length equals the golden ratio phi, 1.618, to 3 decimal places. Both relationships appear simultaneously in a single structure in 2560 BCE. Additionally, the height of the pyramid corresponds to the polar radius of the Earth to within 0.2%, a relationship that either encodes genuine geodetic knowledge or represents the most extraordinary dimensional coincidence in architectural history. Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory, published in expanded form in The Orion Mystery in 1994, demonstrated that the 3 Giza pyramids match the belt stars of Orion in relative size, spacing, and angular offset, with the Nile corresponding to the Milky Way in the same diagram at a precessional date of approximately 10,500 BCE. In 2017, a paper by Morishima and colleagues published in Nature used muon tomography, subatomic particle imaging, to detect a previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery, roughly the same size as the Grand Gallery itself. No one has entered it, no one has explained it. The mainstream view, most thoroughly represented by Egyptologist Mark Lehner's The Complete Pyramids and the extensive publications of Zahi Hawass, holds that the Great Pyramid was built as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, using a workforce of approximately 20,000 to 30,000 organized workers with ramp systems used for block placement. The mathematical relationships in the dimensions are attributed to the use of the Seked, an Egyptian unit of slope measurement, which naturally produces pi-adjacent ratios as a byproduct of consistent angular construction. The empty inner chambers have various explanations, including tomb robbery in antiquity or a burial that was never completed. But the sect explanation accounts for pi appearing as a byproduct of slope measurement. It does not explain why phi and pi appear simultaneously in the same structure's proportions, since no sect-based construction method produces both ratios at once, and the absence of any burial evidence, no body, no inscriptions identifying a pharaoh, and no burial equipment in the one structure supposedly built as the grandest tomb in a civilization that expended extraordinary effort to preserve and identify royal remains, is not an anomaly that robbery or incompletion resolves cleanly. It is a mystery that the tomb theory has circled for 2 centuries without dissolving. Some researchers ask whether the Great Pyramid was never a tomb, whether its true function has not yet been correctly identified, and whether its mathematical precision was not a byproduct of practical construction, but the deliberate purpose of the construction itself. A structure that encodes pi, phi, and the Earth's polar radius simultaneously, aligned to true north with sub-arc minute accuracy, containing a room-sized hidden void that has never been entered. This is either the most extraordinary accumulation of coincidences in the history of human building, or it is a message encoded in 2.5 million stones at a scale designed to outlast everything. The question that remains is whether we are reading it correctly and what we might be missing. 10 structures, 4 continents, and an ocean floor. 12,000 years from the oldest temple ever found to the hidden chamber inside the most famous monument in the world. Sit with that span for a moment. Not a few centuries of shared tradition, but 12,000 years of impossible precision, coordinated labor, astronomical encoding, and engineering that exceeds the tools and, in some cases, the formal knowledge available to the cultures we say built these things. The mainstream view, stated plainly and fairly, is this: human beings are capable of extraordinary collective achievement, and we consistently underestimate what organized labor, accumulated knowledge, and cultural motivation can produce across centuries. The explanations are not fabrications. Protson's quarry experiments are real. Parker Pearson's bluestone research is real. Leonard's workforce documentation is real. Dismissing that work is not skepticism. It is the same intellectual laziness that buried Göbekli Tepe under the label of a medieval cemetery for 30 years. But something runs beneath all 10 structures that no individual mainstream explanation covers. The problem of convergence without contact. Polygonal stone fitting in Peru and Egypt. Pi and phi encoded simultaneously in pyramids on 2 continents. Astronomical alignments built by cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years, accounting for precession and stellar drift. Underground ventilation mathematics implemented before formal fluid dynamics existed. The orthodox explanations that work for each structure individually become harder to sustain when you stand back far enough to see all 10 at once. The honest position, the only one the combined evidence actually supports, is this: we don't fully know. The timeline of human capability may extend further back than our curricula acknowledge. There may have been bodies of knowledge, networks of transmission, or civilizations whose names we have not yet recovered that shaped what we call the ancient world. Some of what we call primitive achievement may have been inherited, not invented from nothing. Most people move through museums, read the plaque, accept the date, and move on. They assume the institution has it handled. They trust that if there were something more to know, someone would have told them by now. You watch this far. That means you're the kind of person who reads past the plaque, who notices when the explanation is slightly too convenient, who feels the gap between what we're told and what the evidence actually closes. That instinct, the refusal to accept probably as certainly, is the only thing that has ever genuinely moved human knowledge forward. 12,000 years ago, someone stood on a wind-scraped hilltop in southeastern Turkey and built a temple that should not have existed. They cut the stone, they raised the pillars, they carved the animals with a precision that still unsettles the researchers who study them. And then they buried the whole thing carefully, deliberately, and walked away into a history we are only beginning to recover. We have been digging it back up ever since. The question Göbekli Tepe never answers is the one that drives all 10 of these structures. What did they know that they needed to hide? If these stories changed how you look at the ancient stones of our world, subscribe to our channel and like this video. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury. Help us plant the seeds for a new understanding of our past. The next treasure of lost knowledge will be revealed soon.